I'm Simon Kilmurray, Executive Director of the International Documentary Association, and welcome to the kickoff of our 2020 IDA screening series. This evening we'll have a conversation between IndieWire Editor-at-Large Anne Thompson and director Garrett Bradley, whose film Time premiered at Sundance earlier this year. I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I'm joining you from Los Angeles, which is the occupied lands of the Tongva and Chumash peoples, who have been stewards of this land for generations. I also want to thank everyone for tuning in today. These are tumultuous times. Normally we would be in the theater together, perhaps we'd even have a glass of wine afterwards, but at the moment we have to join you digitally. But I hope this at least brings some sense of community to all of us. I also want to thank my team members for their support of the organization and for our media sponsor, IndieWire. If you're not an IDA member, I encourage you to join us. Please go to documentary.org and sign up. That way you'll get access to all the films in the screening series, and you'll be eligible to vote on the IDA Awards later this year. So please do consider joining IDA. It's your support that allows us to bring you these events for free. And with that, I'll hand it over to Anne and Garrett. Thank you for joining us.
Hello all, please welcome Garrett Bradley, who won the Best Director Award at Sundance for Time. It's fair to say that we've never seen a documentary like this before, and yet it is of a piece with your other films, Garrett, like the New York Times doc Alone, which was shortlisted for the Oscar in 2018, where you first met your subject, Sybil Fox Richardson, AKA Fox Rich. How did you meet her?
Well, first of all, Anne, I just want to say thank you for your time, and thank you to IDA, and thank you to all the people who are watching this film and watching us right now. It's a pleasure to be here. So I met Fox in the process of making Alone, and I should say just like very briefly that for me the whole point of making Alone was that somebody I knew was in a relationship with somebody that they loved, and that person ended up awaiting trial in a private prison for about 1.5 years. And the ripple effect that had on all of his family members and loved ones, Lon included, and her sons, was significant. And what was unfortunately ironic about that was that Lon felt very much alone in her decision-making process on how to move forward with her life. And when we think about the fact that there's 2.3 million people who are incarcerated today, that means there's, if not double or triple that number of people who are affected by incarceration in our country. So this idea of isolation is by design. And so I had thought of that film as being really just a facilitation between Lon and other women, intergenerational women who were experiencing the same thing that she did and could offer advice on where to go because of the stigma around incarceration. Sometimes going to family members or friends or coworkers is not possible. And so I had contacted an organization called FLIC, Friends and Families of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children, and Gina Womack, who was the co-founder and director of that organization, picked up. And she said, the first person that you need to speak with is Fox Rich. And so Fox is actually in Alone for a few seconds at the end of that film. And I got to know Fox in the process of making that film. And I thought it was really important to find ways to extend the conversation around incarceration in a way that was familial and emotional and inherently feminist and Black and Southern. And so that's how the film started.
So she gave you an amazing quote in that short. It was, I'm just reading what the quote was. "This system breaks you apart. It is designed, just like slavery, to tear you apart instead of using the whip, they use Mother Time." What an amazing thing to say. And she is no ordinary woman. I mean, you must have understood that instantly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that part of the challenge actually in making the film was to celebrate how kind of exceptional and unique Fox was as a person and how and the whole family was, but to also make sure that people never forgot that this was a universal story and that this is to a certain extent, a universal experience. And that level of exceptionalism is also a part of, it's also a part of oppression. It's both resistance and oppression all in one.
And tell me, are all of the movies, because all the movies I'm aware of, are all of your movies in black and white?
3 of them are. And then I think there's another 3 that are in color. Yeah.
So, and do you consider yourself, I mean, you seem to be moving around from narrative to documentary, and your film Below Dreams was actually, I hope I have that right, was actually a hybrid movie, right?
Yeah. I mean, I call it just a movie. I mean, I did cast everybody off of Craigslist, and so technically, there weren't actors per se in the film, and they were, but they were acting, and it was scripted, and I guess I have this like funny aversion to the word hybrid, because to me, it kind of eliminates the history of what neorealism was, which is where my practice was. I was so inspired by so many neorealist filmmakers in post-war Italy, but also in thinking about the LA Rebellion filmmakers like Billy Woodbury and Charles Brunette and Julie Dash in Los Angeles and in the States. And that was very much about using the resources that were available to you to make a body of work. And so as far as I was concerned, I was kind of learning and coming from that lineage. You didn't necessarily ask me that question per se, but I guess when I hear the word hybrid, it just triggers, triggers it for me.
Let's just call it. I mean, clearly you are not someone who is hanging on to the conventions of filmmaking. I mean, you are breaking, one of the reasons why this movie is so exciting is because you're breaking the rules and you're doing it your way in a really exciting way. It's as though you wanted to pursue a kind of lyrical poetry instead of giving us the facts. You want us to, you say it. I don't want to say it. What are you trying to do?
What am I trying to do? I mean, I think that I think you're right. I mean, I think that what the facts are, to me, are subjective, as we're seeing, right, just in our current administration and in reality, like what are facts? And I think that, that when you think about incarceration and when you think about the effects of a 60-year sentence, for instance, there's I think an opportunity to, in the context of filmmaking, to try to evoke a feeling that is just as powerful as a fact, quote unquote. That facts are, in my mind, sometimes that images and emotion and the way in which images make us feel become facts, and they stay with us and they live in us just as powerfully as letters and numbers do, to a certain extent. And so I think for me, that's what I've always leaned into, because it's just where I've just always gravitated in that direction. And it's not actually that I think that title cards or certain traditional forms of storytelling or fact-telling aren't useful. I think I actually am not good at it. And I think I was never good at fitting in. And so I just continued to do what I thought I was good at. And I feel really grateful that it seems to resonate with people.
Well, the other film I wanted to ask you about, just as a prelude to this one, was America, the short, which was 12 vignettes in half an hour, covering early history. And you did use images very effectively in that case. How did that affect this movie, or inform it, or push you in this direction?
Yeah, thank you for helping to make that connection, because there were so many different layers, so many things I learned in the making of America that I think really informed how I was approaching time. On one hand, it was the use of archive and thinking about the personal archive and the public archive, and blending that in with a contemporary archive, if you will, blending it in with my own perspective or with new footage, and trying to find interesting ways, or trying to find ways in which if we think about archive as sort of a fixed element, as something that can't change because it was shot by people we don't know, there's nothing that if we can think about it actually as being flexible, that we can get new dimensions and new information from something that, that appears to be fixed. I was really intrigued by that challenge. And I also was, and I think in the context with America, it was looking at material from 1913 and it being incredibly important to me that, that the actual power and hierarchy and brilliance and the nuance and performance in there was extremely clear and not taken for granted just because Bert was wearing blackface, for instance, right? That we had full context for what it took actually to create that body of work. And how can I say that when I only have the work itself? You know what I mean? And it's the same thing with Fox, I think. Like, she built her own archive as a way, I think, of resisting the oppressive nature of her circumstance, but also to assert this idea of what American is and what being wholesome is. And so those were things that were in my mind, I think, in making both of those films that really do intersect. And I also think going back to this idea of performance, you know, and Fox being a natural performer and leader. And that a lot of that, to a certain extent, is a result of having to go in front of parole boards, right? Like, I think the archive shows this wild, youthful, young girl, really, and her raising this family. And that was a very different person, to a certain extent, that I met 19 years into the process before I knew that this archive existed.
Let's tell us about that. Let's explain what happened. You started making one movie. Tell us what you started to do, and then what happened at the end.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I thought I was making another short op-doc, and another 13-minute film as a sort of sister film to Alone. And I, you know, said to Fox at a certain point, you know, I'm going to come back. I think we're done shooting, and I'm going to come back and show you what I have. And as I was going out the door, she was on the phone with Robert, and she said, she handed me a black bag of years worth of her family archive, all on mini DV tapes, none of which she had seen since she shot in the 90s. And, you know, I mean, just the emotional process of what it means when somebody trusts you enough to give you physical material that's not backed up, it's not sitting on a server somewhere, getting in a car, driving with it, shipping it to California, transcoding it, and working with Concordia Studios, who at that point had gotten involved in the project, really to say to me, it was an incredible opportunity to say, like, what do you need as a filmmaker? How can you elevate your practice? And for me, that meant working with an editor for the first time, and working in an editing bay, and actually having physical support to make a film. And so I worked with Gabe Rhodes at that point. We looked at all the footage, and it was very clear that it was...
Pick him because he's one of the greats.
Yeah, I mean, I picked him because, well, I should just finish my thought there in saying that that's when it became a feature, was when we went through all of that footage, you know?
Footage. I want to know how it affected you when you saw it. I want to know how it changed everything and what you understood as a filmmaker about how to use it.
I mean, it was 100 hours of footage, and I think that it was so clear that there were things I would never be able to show, things that I knew about Fox, about how brilliant and free-spirited and free, really, that she was, and that the whole family was, really. But I couldn't. It was really difficult with the footage that I had to prove that, and I think that the archive proved that in ways that I never could have, you know. And so Gabe and I watched the footage.
It was a gift.
It was a gift. It was a gift. Yeah. And to me, this film is actually like a third film. There's my film, there's her film, and then there's Time, which is these two films kind of coming together. And Gabe, you know, had cut the MIA documentary, which I had seen at Sundance, I think a year prior from when we started working. And MIA, you know, that documentary had a lot of similar themes. It was dealing with a strong woman who was an artist and a performer and also really politically engaged and had a very, like a huge personal archive. So it seemed like a natural fit, you know.
So how did you figure out the connection points, the editing structure that you were using, which was, you know, there's some amazing cuts between the young woman and then the professional woman. I mean, it was really fun to watch her grow into her own, and to watch the sons grow.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of I think there were two ways of thinking about it. There was big picture, which was showing sort of, as you said, the evolution and the revolution of this individual and how we can chart that over the course of time from the archive to this present moment. But then there were also these really amazing things that were happening that were not always related to story points, but that were more formal, that were just completely visual. Like the fact that Fox spent a lot of time with the camera at the side of her desk and her sitting profile, you know, working, which is how I was shooting her a huge amount of time when I was in the office with her. And so there were these kind of magical happenstance moments where we wanted to make really clear connections on that level, you know, that we're not completely 100% always just rooted in the story.
Was it always going to be black and white?
No, we went back and forth. I mean, I had sort of always thought of it as like, okay, this is part 2 to Alone. So yes, it's going to be in black and white because Alone was in black and white. And Alone was in black and white because America was in black and white and I just was seeing in black and white. But then all the archive is in color. And so we went back and forth quite a bit. And I ultimately felt like going to black and white is really connected conceptually with this idea of time, right? Of there always being kind of this present moment. It also, I think, formally, just with all the textures and the materiality of the archive blended with the present day footage, the black and white kind of helped it to feel more like a river and less of a collage. And I think that uniformity is what then ultimately allowed the film to hold the music. Otherwise, it would have been, I think, too much. How it felt.
Music. This is a composer who is a nun, who I've never heard of.
Yeah. So she goes by Emma Hoy, and she's a 96-year-old Ethiopian nun, and she's still alive. And she was a prisoner of war and was trained in Western classical music, and then returned to her country and kind of reinvented her own genre that is a sort of blend of Ethiopian and Western melody. And I came across the music just through some like weird YouTube algorithm. It just popped up. I was listening to a lot of 1970s Ethiopian music, and this popped up. She had recorded it in 1962, I believe, to raise money for an orphanage. It was the only time she'd recorded her music. We were incredibly lucky. One of our producers, Kellen Quinn, tracked down her foundation and shared the film, and they were really gracious in allowing us to use the music. And I love the idea of bringing these two women together too, you know, in a space.
So remind me why Rob ended up getting this sentence of 60 years. Why was it so punitive and so long? And she did a plea bargain and got off in 3 and only served 3. Is that right?
Yeah. And it's, you know, I'll be honest with you that a part of it is that question was a huge part of the editorial process in terms of to what extent do we get into that and really start to delve into the whys. And I would like to answer it in 2 ways. One is to say that the film is functioning off of the premise that it is just as much about the effects of incarceration as it is about the facts and what actually happened and what caused these things. Wanting people to understand what this means for family members and what it means for love and for Black unity. The other way of answering it is to say that racism is a really hard thing to explain in legal terms. In fact, I don't think you can legally prove racism. It's very difficult. And so the reason why it was so punitive was because they committed a crime in Louisiana. And, you know, the Louisiana incarcerates people at a higher rate than the rest of the world. So there were a lot of things that ended up leading into that, but I kind of prefer not to go down that road because it ultimately was an unjust sentence, and there are much more important, I think, broader issues surrounding it, you know, that the film chooses to address.
Right. And then you also have those extraordinary shots of her getting on the phone with, you know, to find out what's happened with the appeal, you know, just over and over and over. And that combination of control and patience and just her perseverance. You know, she wants to know, and it's like she's hiding her emotions, but you can see. Maybe you could explain what it is we're seeing there. You must have a million times.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's it's bureaucracy. It's you know, just to get some basic information so that she can move forward was incredibly difficult. And so, you know, we were only filming, I think, maybe for 2 years, 2.5 years total. But every day there was a conversation that Fox was having with somebody in the judge's office or at the court or with an attorney or with Robert. So it was there wasn't a single day that was not mired by having to strategize and move through the bureaucracy of the system. That was really important to see. You know, it was really important, I think, for me to show that how, as you said, the amount of control that it took when you are at the mercy of people who have so much control. They have a lot of control over how much they're going to tell you, when they're going to tell you.
And be deferential in a certain way. That's watch also.
Yeah. And that's part of the power dynamic. That's part of what I think is also sort of difficult to describe about racism and about the situation. It's something that I think you have to see and feel and relate to, that we've all been in situations where we want something that's very difficult to get, and we're going to have to do something in order to get that. We're going to have to act a certain way that doesn't necessarily feel right, but we have to make a sacrifice. And there's, you know, 2.3 million people, if not double, triple that number, that are doing that every day as a result of this.
Yeah. No, she perseveres. And what you also have here, as we talk about the different mixes of genres, you have a love story here.
Yeah.
That seems to be the most important through line. She hung on to her man.
Yeah. Yes, she did. She did. And that's, you know, yes. 21 years. It is a love story. And that's also the whole, you know, that's why I think that there can be many, many films, and hopefully there will be many, many films that can be made around this issue, because there are so many love stories, you know, and there's so many examples of people who've been over time systematically separated from their loved ones as a result of slavery and now the prison industrial complex. So
by the way, the Sundance short America, is that something we can see somewhere? Is it?
Yeah. It's actually,
you can see Alone on there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So America is going to open actually as an installation in November in New York as a part of the Studio Museum in Harlem and the Museum of Modern Art. They're coming together to put together a show that will be at MoMA in November. So that has been a really exciting process to be able to, you know, think about my work in ways that go outside of two-dimensional space. And then the film itself, the single channel, which premiered at Sundance, will be out next year.
Okay. So it's also interesting because what time represents in your career, because it was you know, obviously a very big hit out of Sundance and got picked up by Amazon, is a different kind of access to a wider audience than you had before. How did it feel to show it at Sundance and get the reaction that you did?
It felt really good. I think it felt really good because Fox and Rob and the whole family were there with us, and so it was a collective celebration. It was the first time that the sons had seen the film, so Fox and Rob watched it before we went to Sundance, and for them it was the first time that they were all watching it together, and so it was very emotional, but it was such a collective joy is what it was. It was really, really magical.
I can't even, I wish I'd been there. I wish I'd been there to see that. So what kind of feedback did they give you from, it must have been intense for them to see the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I'm making a film, I try really hard to have, I think it's really important, I should say, to have conversations with the people that you're making this film with, not thinking about them as subjects, but as human beings, and saying, you know, why do you want me to make this film? Why are you okay with me following you around for X period of time? Because I myself personally would have a really difficult time with someone making a film about me in my life, right? So there's got to be something that a person feels is important enough and matters to them enough in their heart and in their life that they want to share their story, that there's a larger cause beyond me following them with the camera. And so it was really clear from the beginning that the reason why we were doing this together was that there is a real need out there for shared experience and for people to understand what the effects of incarceration are having on families presently in this moment, unequivocally. And so that intention never changed, you know, in terms of how the film goes out into the world, when the film goes out into the world, and with whom. That was always the baseline, most important thing, you know, that hasn't changed.
Going to be seen by a lot of people. I mean, that's the whole idea.
Yeah.
To get this message out.
Yeah.
Right. So you also shot second unit on Ava DuVernay's When They See Us. What was that? What was that like? And how did Ava and you come together?
I had the pleasure of meeting her very briefly. I got the pleasure of watching her on set and seeing her on set at Queen Sugar. And I shared some of my work with her. And she actually gave me my first TV opportunity, which was to direct an episode of Queen Sugar.
Good.
And so we developed a relationship, and with When They See Us, I mean, it was really a one of a kind experience, I think, being able to be on that set, because in many ways it was functioning in the same principles, in the same ways that you do with documentary filmmaking, in terms of the integrity that's required for how you're telling a story and who you're involving and what the collaborative process needs to be. And so my contribution, you know, was minimal in comparison to what ultimately I think the world was able to experience. And I was just really lucky to be able to contribute, you know, and to witness and to be a part of what she created there.
What she does, which I applaud her for constantly, is she gives a lot of opportunities to,
Yeah.
And she brings people along. She has a big cape behind her. That
Yeah, she does.
And she does that, and she feels very, very strongly about doing that. And you know, that's important. It's important in this world. Now, you apparently you feel very strongly always about having a diverse crew. Tell me why that's important to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the same way that we talk about Ava's, you know, insistence on inclusion in the industry, for me, the reason for that, and it trickles all the way down to who you hire, for who you work with. It isn't just for the sake of being politically correct or just for the sake of being diverse. It actually means that you are adding perspective and adding experience. And our medium as filmmakers is about perspective, you know? And so the more perspective you're adding, the more you are evolving the medium. And it's sort of been a simple equation, you know?
Evidence that the more inclusion there is in any given project, the bigger the audience was going to be, you know? It's really, so you had like 3 DPs helping you on this, Zach,
Yeah.
Manuel, and Justin Zweifach and Nisa East?
Yes, yes. And there was also Bron Moy, who popped in for a moment there too. Yeah, I mean, it was a full collaboration, you know, it was a lot. Zach was on the project for a really long time in the beginning, and then, you know, we were staggering it all throughout. And then Nissa was there, I think, for the last 2 weeks or so of shooting, and Justin was in the middle and also working with Zach at times. So, you know, I mean, it was important for me, obviously, that everybody understand the visual language of what we were doing. And, but ultimately, so much of it also had to do with energy and who was coming into the space with the family, and not thinking about it as just sort of like any crew member. I mean, we're energetic beings. We feed and respond to what people are putting out. And so it's just as much about the talent of those cinematographers as I think it is about their energy too, and their positive vibe that they brought.
Understand. What is your take on the recently announced details of the Academy inclusion standards for the Oscars? How important?
I think it's great. Right on.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You know, it says there's so many filmmakers who are sort of objecting to being told what to do somehow, like it's somehow infringing on their freedom as creators.
Well, I think being told what to do is sort of a funny way of thinking about it, because it kind of, there's a certain amnesia around just what was expected, you know, that like that this supposed freedom that we used to have in the past was just naturally by default eliminated women and people of color, you know? So I think that there's, you know, to a certain extent, we've always been told what to do, and we've always been followers, a lot of us, you know? And so this is an opportunity to not be a follower and expand your practice, you know?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, and so you were living in Louisiana for many, many years. Are you still based there, or have you broadened your horizons? Where are you right now?
Right now I'm in California. But I lived in New Orleans for 10 years, and my partner's from there. I mean, New Orleans will always be a home to me. I think I'm a nomad right now, and it's mostly because of COVID and also because of work. And, it's kind of presented new ways of thinking about my work.
What kind of impact has the pandemic had on you and your work?
I think that, you know, so much of where I start is in asking questions and in being engaged with people and being curious about people, and looking outward. And I think COVID has presented new challenges for that. So there's been a lot of solitude, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think it's also given me the time to think about how the same questions that I've been asking that are so geographically located might also apply to other spaces, you know, and how bringing those things together can also help create a more holistic understanding of the world that we're in on some level. I don't know, we'll see.
I have to assume that since Sundance and due to the extreme demand now for women directors, I mean, things have changed. I bet your phone is ringing.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I think my phone is ringing. I mean, I don't know. It's so hard to respect because I think I don't want to be hired because I'm filling somebody's quota. And I think that it's really clear sometimes, you know, when you pick up the phone, if that's what people are looking at. Like I still think that anybody, no matter who they are, wants to feel like they're being approached because of the quality of their character and the quality of the work that they make. And so that is always the most important thing to me.
But can you talk about any of the projects that might be coming up? Anything new?
Well, I'm just really excited about this show that's going to be opening for America for the installation. I think I'm really excited to be able to, it's the first time it'll be in New York. It was at CAM in Houston, Texas before that, and in New Orleans before that. And I'm just, for me, there's a lot of possibilities that are presented in new ways of thinking in physical space. And so that's where I'm at right now.
Thank you so much for doing this, Garrett. Thank you for talking to us. And
Thank you so
congratulations
much.
on this beautiful, beautiful movie.
Thank you. So appreciate that.